the presentation will be given by Dr. Stefan Löhle. He is Managing Director of cyclos and an expert in waste management systems and circular economy. But before we come to this part, I'm happy to introduce you to a surprising guest because she was not named in the program. It's Dr. Kirsten Barnes from the South African Plastics Pact. Plastic Pact is an initiative joining the various stakeholders along the plastics value chain in South Africa. And together they have been working on the various topics of circular economy and so including circular design. Kerstin is a circular economy analyst with long-term experience in this sector, and she will tease the session with an input on the experiences and needs in regard to circular design in Africa and South Africa. Kerstin, please.
Great. Thank you so much. It's really good to be with you here today. I'm just going to switch my display. I think that should be presenting in presenter mode. Is that correct? Okay, I'm going to assume that's good. Thank you. Okay, so very pleased to be your surprising guest today. Thank you very much for the invite. It's really good to be here. So I'm from Green Cape. We're an NGO with a vision for a thriving, prosperous Africa built on green and circular economy principles. And we're also the Secretariat for the South African Plastics Pact. And so as such, we're part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Plastics Pact network, as well as RAP's network of plastics pacts in low to middle income country settings. As a brief perspective from South Africa to kick off the session, I've entitled my input Design for Circularity in South Africa. Although such a goal is not well defined in South Africa as a whole, this is something we're working with our Plastics Pact members to define to drive progress towards our ambitious 2025 targets. So the starting point today is to consider what is the state of recyclability of plastic packaging in South Africa, with recyclability being more the predominant paradigm, not really circularity. So as you can see from my graph on screen, that around 48% of the plastic packaging placed on the market in South Africa is graded as an adequate recycling rate. So this, in line with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's definition, is a greater than 30% output recycling rate is that threshold at which packaging can be called recyclable. So you can see the picture we have on screen currently sitting at 48%. So what is the reason for this picture? How have we come to this point? This has largely been through our voluntary extended producer responsibility system. So this is where the different EPR bodies had guidance on design for recyclability, and they put quite a bit of investment and work with their members to achieve such a thing. It also speaks to the action of the global brands and the efforts towards designing for recyclability and even circularity placed on the market in South Africa. So moving on from that point, so beyond the so-called quick wins, where we currently sit in South Africa is that the confusion in design for recycling guidance is currently hampering our progress towards improving the recyclability of formats, particularly in the less than 30% output recycling rate. And there's a number of reasons for this. Some of them include our producer responsibility organizations and industry bodies are misaligned on the definition of recyclability. Some of these bodies have strong elements of a sort of material advocacy, being representative of virgin plastic producers and packaging manufacturers of some of the more problematic streams for circularity. And a definition of technical recyclability is favored by some, which in essence is interpreted by some within the industry as that all plastic packaging placed on the market in South Africa can be called recyclable, which is clearly not a helpful definition. Most guidelines also aim at only one additional life of the material only. So what this means is that low quality products are encouraged through such guidelines. These are often multi-polymer or even multi-material products produced from that recyclate. These products will have very low value at end of life, which means they themselves are unlikely to be recovered for recycling. The best place for them is likely landfill, and in the worst case scenario, there's leakage into the environment and degradation in situ. What we also find is that recyclers are not always sufficiently consulted, or recyclers producing the lowest quality recyclate are taken as the benchmark for recyclability and then communicated through virgin plastics industry or packaging manufacturers, some of them, that this is a truly recyclable packaging type, because it can go into a very mixed bag of a recycler that produces quite a low quality recyclate. So we want to build on the voluntary EPR, so the status we currently see in South Africa in terms of our recyclability. And we're doing that through two particular lenses. The first particularly is voluntary commitment, and that's where ourselves as SA Plastics Pact are playing a big role. Our Plastics Pact members have requested that we collaborate as members, bringing in external experts within South Africa and beyond, and from the Plastics Pact network, to clarify the landscape, because there is confusion given these different approaches that we currently see from design for recycling guidelines. So we're aiming at a design for circularity, and these are the principles we're currently applying. So again, as I mentioned, recyclable is that packaging in South Africa which is at a greater than 30% output recycling rate. We focus on recycling applications where the product has a high value at end of life, and therefore is likely to be recovered and recycled, ideally also at a greater than 30% output recycling rate. We are including design for recycled content in our specific guidance, and in future we're aiming at design for reuse refill. Our current approach is adapting the Consumer Goods Forum's Golden Design Rules. The reason we took that approach is that some of our members are also members of the working group at the global level. Also, the Golden Design Rules are high-level snapshots of the requirements for recyclability that are relatively easily applied across the range of different maturity in recycling economies and circularity. So the idea is that in relating to our nearest neighbours, as we think more of a regional circular economy within Southern Africa, that this would be a really good stance to work off or position to work from. We are then incorporating the existing guidelines, of which there are quite a few in South Africa, but filtered according to the principles that you see on screen. The other development in South Africa, which is addressing design for recyclability and beyond towards circularity, is from November last year, our mandatory extended producer responsibility system is now in play. The purpose of the regulations, specifically stated, also includes implementation of circular economy initiatives. So that's in our EPR regulations. So to that end, we have targets for collection, recycling, recycled content in some of the plastics, with the idea that that will extend to other plastics. It's currently only in the PET. And there are reuse targets also referenced in our regulations and notices. The reuse targets are currently only populated for glass, but there's potential to extend it to other packaging types. Design for recyclability is also specifically required of PROs in our legislation, and EPR fee calculations must include the element of ease of recyclability. What we are still working on within the establishment phase is consensus and clarity. There are still some issues in defining recyclability with all the key stakeholders across South Africa and some of the targets. So this is very much a work in progress in our first year of mandatory EPR implementation. Then in terms of standardization towards global circular design, some of the concerns that we have that would in theory be solved through standardization towards global circular design. So some of the concerns which would push us towards a standardization, and we definitely do support that in line with moving towards the global treaty, is that increasing requirements and legislation in some of the more developed markets in terms of circularity will result in sales pushes and the increase in less circular or more difficult plastics and plastic packaging into less regulated markets such as ourselves. Less circular plastics supplied to low and middle income countries have greater negative effects than in higher income countries. So the waste management burden is disproportionately more. We often have waste management systems which are not particularly well functioning, and there's a much higher chance of leakage into the environment. A standardization should address that concern. We also, as we all know, have limited information on the plastics that are imported, or we do in South Africa, and the tariff codes will simply classify by the main polymers, and there's no to very limited information on laminations, additives, barrier layers, any other complexities that have been incorporated in the design, and particularly when packaging, for example, plastic packaging enters as filled packaging. So the implications for our recycling systems are unknown, and that is an area of concern. Also, something to highlight, I think this is quite an obvious point, but in certain developed economies, it's projected that chemical recycling will scale in the short to medium term. We clearly do not expect such a trend in low to middle income countries. One of the biggest barriers, we've been working with some partners in sort of defining feasibility, and one of the biggest barriers is simply in collection. We don't have defined collection streams of which you can then put together a specific stream that's helpful for your particular technology. So that's very important to note, and very unlikely to occur in the short to medium term. In terms of opportunities in standardization, where we see the big potential is increasing the proportion of plastic packaging most likely to be recycled. What we see on the global scale could build economies of scale for local recycling within country in low to middle income countries. Such standardization could be a strong enabler of a regional recycling economy, where currently market size and the size of the investment limits potential for recycling within each country, and that information to verify stream type and quantity crossing borders. Obviously, the Basel Convention is very key in that engagement as well, will also be very useful in enabling a regional recycling economy. Then in terms of the last point I have on screen, Stefan, I'm stealing your time, is reduced burden on already strained waste management systems. We don't want to see or plastics and packaging types that have very limited potential for circularity to continue to overburden our strained waste management systems. So I'm very excited to hear the more details now, the work we need to do to head towards that standardization to give effect to our UN Global Treaty that will limit plastic pollution. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you, Kirsten, for this really insightful input. I think you have taken up, or you have addressing a lot of very relevant issues for our presentation. So it's a great introduction. And also quite interesting is to see that things are moving in South Africa. And also valuable, I think, are your considerations regarding the Global Plastic Treaty. And I hope that this will guide us, but also stakeholders in the design of the provisions of this treaty. I'm not sure if there are any urgent questions that the participants would like to ask Kirsten. If not, you can also put your questions in the chat, and Kirsten, I think, will happily answer the questions. But then I would suggest that we continue with Stefan's presentation on the paper. And I will, while he is doing that, I will put it again in the chat that you can also have a look on it. Stefan, are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you, Fong. And thank you, Kirsten, for providing the perfect floor for this presentation. Give me a second. Hope you can see it. Presentation mode. Fong, can you give me a sign? Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. That's good.
So welcome, everybody. It's an honor to speak here about improving packaging design for achieving more circularity towards the Global Plastic Treaty. My name is Stefan Löhle. I'm from cyclos, and here you can see the agenda of the report that is already written, and I think you also got provided beforehand of this session. So first of all, giving a short introduction about the aim and the scope of that report, definitions of the common understandings, short recap of existing standards and then country example of Malaysia and Commonalities and general principles we deduct from that. And then I will extensively talk about choosing the most appropriate packaging design with regards to the product protection, alignment with waste hierarchy, and the alignment with the existing waste infrastructure to come to the end to the eco-design guide. So we all know that plastic have become the ubiquitous material used in the various sectors, and the report we were focusing on was commissioned about the specific focus on fast-moving items such as plastic packaging to examine which strategies and mechanisms of circular design and eco-design can be applied to increase recyclability and circularity at all. The aim and scope of this report was, first of all, and this was also stated out yesterday during the sessions, to have a common understanding of definitions and terms we use in that field, and considering existing standards for recyclability.
Non, mais c'est cuit là, ça fait une heure, maman. C'est pas la peine de réfléchir. Maintenant, c'est cuit là. Non, non, non.
Excuse me, can you unmute yourself, please? Those who are not speaking. Thank you.
With the focus on SAPs for sales packaging, service packaging, and selected single-use non-packaging items in this report. The track so far, we had, as Frank already said, several workshops and discussions, also in the sub-working group of Prevent Waste Alliance. The current status that is the final draft for discussion and revision shared that, and also from insights and maybe comments from your side, and we expect to publish it soon. So coming to definitions and common understanding of relevant terms, first of all here, eco-design as an umbrella term that is covering a lot of aspects we have to put together when we think about packaging design. So it's about recyclability, design for recycling, recyclate usage, also substitution, what is mainly addressed in this guidance paper. But beside that, also very important and to keep in mind, reduction and packaging redesign if possible, as well as product redesign in order to maybe come up with a complete new packaging. I think you unmuted me, or do you still hear me?
No, I did not.
Okay.
Now we can hear you. Just keep going.
Okay, I go on. So what do we account or define as recyclability is that is a individual and gradual suitability of a packaging to factually substitute material identical virgin material in the post-use phase. So factually means that we need also a infrastructure in place, and this came also from Kirsten's presentation, that it is important to distinguish between recyclability and the potential design for recycling, because the infrastructure in each country we see packaging in use is very crucial, and especially when it comes to the collection, because without a collection we do not enter a recycling status of a packaging. So this we have to keep in mind when using the terms recyclability and design for recycling, while we know that most European countries do have proper and sustainable collection systems, but a lot of developing countries still have a lack in collection. Mechanical recycling, I just give some examples of the definitions we made, is something you probably know. We put a picture on the right side to give you a hint what it means. So that means that we leave the polymers of the plastics intact, and it is not split into its chemical constituents. So we see mechanical recycling mainly for plastic types PE, PP, PS, and PET. They are mainly bottles. And what is common for these principles? So we need a kind of sorting stage, we have a washing, and then we have a melting, and at the end, hopefully, regranuled to substitute primary material in comparable applications in the plastic type. So recycled content refers to the portion of materials used in a packaging, in this case, or product that has been derived from the solid waste stream through a recycling process, as said before. And there we have to distinguish between the pre-consumer content, recycled content, and the post-consumer content, while knowing that the post-consumer content is the one we are looking and aiming for because of this amount is hard reachable for the generation of regranules. And the report addresses further definitions when it comes to design strategies by giving definitions for reductions, substitutions, and product redesign. We talk about virgin and recycled plastic and generally plastic types, with a special focus on bioplastics, including the terms of biodegradable or bio-based. We highlight specific terms of plastic waste treatment, from reuse to energy recovery, and also address some special challenges when it comes to food contact, halal, or contaminants. In the second stage of that report, we assessed the existing standards, where the JRC report already stated out that we have over 100 guidelines for design or eco-design of packaging and all these aspects. They got to know that these guidelines have developed by different organizations, companies, or experts that have a different focus on what means recycling, or different levels of details of the packaging items, different categories in which the products can be assigned to, and also different audiences in different scopes. So this made it really hard to compare them and bring them on a certain level. The report also emphasizes that there are several challenges with all these guidelines. So when it comes to the deeper level, there's a lack of transparency and consistency regarding the criteria they applied in their assessment of recyclability, which is very important in the context also of EPR. Fee modulation, as Kirsten said before. These guidelines have most of the time a specific country-specific focus due to the fact that they are dependent on the infrastructure of the several countries. They challenge to combine full recyclability with full functionality of a product. This is also why we decided to turn around the guide, not only talking about several plastic types, but also talking about the content and the filling of the packaging item. And there's a lack of recycled polymer use guidelines, so what can be done out of it. As Kirsten addressed before, for South Africa, also Malaysia is on the road to hopefully achieve more circularity, and they published their National Plastic Sustainability Roadmap, also addressing some upstream measures they want to put into force. So about, and there is, for instance, also packaging design addressed. So they will firstly are mandating for a sustainable design. They want to increase the demand for recycled material during the period to 2030, and they suggest also a minimum threshold of recycled content by achieving in 2025. But the same way as before, there are some challenges. So there's for Malaysia a lack of clarity around using recycled content in food grade applications. What we have here in Europe well defined in legal frameworks. There's a lack of domestic R&D on sustainable design and material innovations for end products, and they have still an absence of a legal framework that might promoting a optimized product design, such as extended producer responsibility. The World Bank had in their report a bit more deeper look on the packaging items, and they identified issues particularly related but not limited to colored plastics that cannot be reverted back into the natural color. They found issues according to additives and fillers, such as chalk for the polyolefins that hinders the recycling processes, and issues having composites and multi-layers that are not easily disassembled. Out of these hundreds of guidelines and also insights from other countries like Malaysia, we tried to establish some general principles and commonalities. But first of all, I have to say we have some limitations with this. First of all, out of these standards, we saw there is not a general applicable principle. So we have also, it's a multi-step or multi-view on a packaging item. So we have several layers of decision making, keeping in mind, and we'll come to that later. We want to consider only principles that are generally applicable worldwide, so that we have to acknowledge that they represent kind of the low-hanging fruits, what we see as comparably easy to be implemented, while knowing that might be further developed sorting and recycling infrastructure achieves more. And thirdly, we did not take into consideration chemical recycling as still not an available recycling options in scale. So what is comparably easy to optimize your packaging? So it's about the avoidance of sleeves. So why should I have a sleeve made mainly out of different plastic types? If I can completely avoid it, I'll use maybe links with water-soluble adhesives. It is about avoiding opaque PET, since this plastic type is hard and often not compatible in the PET recycling processes. It is about barriers and additives and fillers, so the avoidance of the mentioned chalk, for instance, for polyolefins, but also of barriers that are not fitting with the recycling process due to the different melting points. If you use a plastic packaging, it should be as much multi-material as possible. So this is for achieving more circularity, one of the main aspects. And coming to labels, labels should be kept as small as possible, and they should also be easily being separated. And what is to avoid is PVC labels. Generally, PVC should be phased out from being used in packaging. Removable caps and lids, well, knowing that we have here a misagreement with when it comes to littering, but for the recycling aspect, it would be better to have them removable. It is about the separability of components in the recycling process, and further aspects, and I do not want to go through all of them, because when we come for choosing the most appropriate packaging design, we have to consider a bit more just talking about the packaging itself. So it is important to note that these pillars do all have an impact on the implication of a packaging design. So it is also about the product protection and other packaging functions that have to be fulfilled. It is about the alignment with the waste hierarchy and other eco-design strategies, and it is about the alignment with the existing infrastructure. So, coming to the first pillar, the product protection. A packaging has several functions, but they are not all equally important. So we choose the ones we defined as most important in terms of product protection. So which are crucial to be met. It is the protection against ambient conditions. It is about enabling the uptake and intake for the distribution of fillings. This mainly applies for beverages. It is about protection against shock and chemical stress, and protection against biological factors, which could degrade the fillings. Coming to the waste hierarchy. And these pillars we all try to consolidate them in that matrix we come later to. The waste hierarchy gives us also a kind of prioritizing which measures should be used first. So before talking about more or an optimized packaging design, we also have to talk about whether the packaging can be completely prevented as the first steps in terms of avoidance of waste. This is the main important one. So the second one is, can the packaging maybe be prevented partially? Is there a possible solution having a reusable packaging, or is the preparation for use an option for packaging? Well, knowing that this mainly does not apply for the common household packaging. And then we come to the stage if the packaging can be recycled. The third pillar is about the waste management infrastructure in place where the packaging then becomes waste. And this is what I addressed before, talking about actual recyclability versus only being designed for recycling. So we also that means that an ideal product and packaging design always needs to be evaluated also in light of the existing infrastructure in place, and this is what we should keep in mind. Coming to the eco-design guide and what came out of all these limits and barriers and insights from everywhere, we made a quite extensive matrix that should serve decision makers or politicians or producer responsibility organizations or the EPR system itself or whatever, who's able to have a certain decision on what he wants to use as a packaging to guide them. So here's a example for a sells food and beverage packaging. We have different categories, so it's about water, and you see, okay, as the main requirements we defined to save the ambient conditions in brackets. It is mainly about uptake and intake and less about shock and mechanical stress. What packaging solutions do we find in that field? We are talking about PET bottles mainly, obviously, PE and PP-based pouches and films, for instance, sachets. What could be a solution in terms of substitution, always well knowing that a substitution might lead to other problems, but as a possibility, and this is why this is yellow, it has to be assessed specifically. It could be a glass bottle, it could be a liquid packaging board or a metal can, well knowing that we need collection and recycling therefore as well. Coming to recyclate content, and you see that then in green for PET bottles, basically this is possible, well knowing that there are food grade recycling processes that enable a food grade granule, for instance, to be used in food grade applications. For the PE paste pouch, if we would stay to that packaging design, this is not possible due to the fact that we do not see appropriate food grade recycling processes in this place. For recyclability, there you see again the common principles. So, okay, when you choose a PET bottle, then do it that the PET bottle is completely made of PET A, that it is transparent or widely colorless, that it has small compatible labels or sleeves, avoid PVC, wash off, adhesives, no direct printing, and if you use inks on sleeves and labels, then according to Nokia, you can fully avoid additives and barriers for PET bottles, and if you use caps and closures, use PP and HDPE due to the fact that they might end up in a recycling station. But what is also to be considered, where we see established options and other strategy is to use tap water if possible. Might not apply for every developing country, but for Europe it is possible in a lot of countries. Or refillable water containers in order to prevent completely the PET bottle. Or we know about deposit system in multiple use or deposit system in single use that then achieve comparably higher collection and recycling rates. And then on the right side, you see a lot of numbers for further explanation due to the fact that every possibility or opportunity you might choose out of this comes with a certain thing to think about. And this we did for several, I don't know the number, types of packaging. Here you see the example for fruits and vegetables, talking about PET trays, PP trays, or also pouches, and so on. And we have different main requirements. We have also here a only limited possibility to use recyclate content due to the food grade issue. But when we come to non-food packaging, for instance, for cleaning, detergents, and so on, we have mainly everything green because there we widen our possibilities to work on a more recyclable design. But while knowing that other options to consider might be less in these cases. At the end, this matrix is also about takeaway or service packaging. And they see there are a lot of other options to consider, and in order to keep time, I will now not explain everything in detail, but please have a look and give comments on what we wrote. So coming now to the end, to the conclusions in the sense of a global treaty. So this eco-design guide offers the possibility for reducing plastic amount and strengthen the plastic recycling. But to point out, the 5 steps if a packaging is potentially to be completely prevented, etc., should be assessed as the first stage in terms to achieve more circularity, or better, to avoid completely plastic packaging. We will, or we see the need in harmonization for standards, and will be required. We have highlighted some principles, and we see them as a basis, I think, for the further development on this stage. This is well said, while knowing that the waste management infrastructure, and especially the infrastructure for proper collection, sorting, recycling, are still lacking to a certain extent in low and middle income countries. And to sufficiently manage the plastic packaging waste, and also to prevent leakages in the marine and terrestrial environment, like marine litter or terrestrial litter, we need additional instruments beside that eco-design guide, especially for the financing of the techniques and services in handling that waste in collection and recycling. And for this eco-design guide, in combination with other binding, or first of all voluntary legal approaches like EPR systems or other solutions, possibly lead to the highest impact to achieve more circularity. Thanks.